This story was written by user NoMas39 and was originally posted to the NoSleep subreddit. A link to the full story is down below. The illustrations, music, and editing was done by me. Chances are you've been to hell at least once in your life and never even realized it. With surprising frequency, some people find themselves stumbling along the furthest peripheries of hell, if only briefly, from sheer bad luck. They fall into glitches in reality, the places where some confluence of natural forces, both known and unknown, named and unnameable, summated in some incalculable way, such that something fundamental just broke. Like an earthquake along the fault lines of the universe, tearing open a sinkhole beneath your feet. I've heard so many stories, but all share a single commonality. You will find yourself suddenly alone. Maybe you were walking home at night only to find the neighborhood was so much quieter than it should be, and the lights were all out, and there was no blaring of TV sets or barking of dogs, and all the shadows seemed starker, and the air was heavy and thick, and you pretend that you didn't feel anything primal tingling in your spine, even as you felt your feet start to propel you forward faster and faster without your commanding them, until at last you were safe at home and wondering why you were ever worried. Or perhaps you were a child, emerging from the bathroom to find the shopping mall suddenly emptied out, everything abandoned, quiet, and still in a way that it should never be. Even your mommy vanished into the ether, and for the first time in your life you knew what it was like to be truly alone. And you hid away in the bathroom stall and bawled your little eyes out for what felt like hours, until suddenly you heard your mommy knocking impatiently on the door, and all was well again. It's not a big deal, really. Our instincts do a good job of warning us when we've entered a place that should not exist. It's one of our oldest terrors, one that we can trace through our evolutionary inheritance all the way back to our Precambrian ancestors, same as the fear of drowning. After you were through it, you probably just laughed it off and dismissed it as some case of the willies. But some people get unlucky. Sometimes it sticks to you and doesn't let you go. Some people say it's like trying to teach you a lesson. But I doubt the real explanation is anything so benevolent. All we know is, for some reason or another, some people remain long enough to discover the second rule of hell. Stay too long and you'll find that suddenly you aren't so alone anymore. I found my way into hell while heading west along the Lincoln Highway through Nebraska, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte. It was the perfect place for it, in retrospect. The sort of road where you can't tell the difference between 1 mile and the next, where everything kind of melds together in one blurry green and brown malaise of cornfields and power lines and old farmhouses, and you wonder if you'll ever live to see the end, or if it just goes on forever and ever. I was riding shotgun in a beat-up red pickup truck, indiscernible from any of the thousands of pickup trucks I've ridden in before it. It used to be all big rigs, but they don't let on hitchhikers anymore, insurance reasons. To my right was a busted rearview mirror, and to my left was an older man with a thick accent and skin wrinkled beyond his years in the sun. Sniffing an earth-like powder, he lazily scoops from a 1.2-ounce can labeled Copenhagen Smokeless Tobacco. "Sorry about your brother, kid. Real sorry," he said, nodding to my little cardboard sign reading Denver for brother's funeral. "Thank you," I say sadly. His passing was, well, let's just say it was not unexpected. He's at peace now, and that's what matters. That's a good way of looking at it. Still, sure don't seem like you were expecting it. Haven't seen a hitchhiker out here in, well, it's been a long time. I can't drive and couldn't afford to fly. I know what you're going to say about it being dangerous and all, but Wait, what do you mean you can't drive?" He looked at me sideways. Just the subject made me shudder. I just can't. I can't do it." "Well, I'm guessing you've got a head on your shoulders and a brain between your ears, right? Then what's the issue? It ain't rocket science." My lip quibbled as if grasping with a temptation to tell him the truth. But I just couldn't. I couldn't tell him anything about that crisp December night, the night I remember every time there's a chill in the air. The night me and my boyfriend were soaring down that Pennsylvania back road, and we were laughing and chatting and singing to keep ourselves awake through the night. How were we supposed to know what was about to happen? We hadn't seen another soul in hours. It was just us two in the road. I glanced at him for only a moment as he was telling some story, but then I saw his face go pale and his hands raised to a point, and I just looked in time just to see a black blur on the road, one that was coming fast, so fast. I slammed on the brakes. Maybe if I hadn't, the man would have gone right over the vehicle and lived with a few scrapes, but I did, and instead he was jerked forward off the hood of my car and my front wheels crunched over his body with a wet kerchunk. We stopped there and the only sound was the gentle rumbling of the engine, the breath of a machine, unthinking, unfeeling, with no notion of what had just been done. And all the while in the stillness, I imagined that man popping back up, smiling and laughing and revealing that everything was okay. My brain recreated this fantasy a million times in those seconds, as if fantasizing hard enough could make it real. The reality remained. Things were not okay at all. They would never be. The weight of my tires had wrung the man's neck and caved in part of his skull. My boyfriend stood in front of the body, blocking it, begging me not to look. I pushed him out of the way. I need to see it. I need to. It was a madman's statement, a non sequitur, but said with that sort of finality that silenced all possible argument. And I stood over the body, staring stoically, dispassionately, like I wanted to study every inch of the man I'd just killed. As if by searching over the pores of his skin and fractured skull, cloudy eyes, I could find some sort of truth hidden there, some answer to the question pounding in my aching skull and my beating heart. Why? But there was nothing there. No truth of any significance. Just skin and blood and bits of bone. Drinking, man, I lied. I got caught drinking too many times. They took my license. You? Such a nice young man. Who would have thunk? Well, I hope you learned a good lesson there, bud, he said and spat out the window. You know, I wish I could blame the kids these days, but honestly, things were just as bad in the 70s. Worse, maybe. Everybody was driving around drunk as a skunk back then. Still, you're lucky you didn't kill anybody. Funnily enough, that fake confession wasn't what ended up making him ditch me on the side of the road. That part came when I stupidly let slip that I hadn't voted for the same guy as he did. I was out on my ears again, but I figured I couldn't be too far from Gothenburg now, and my gut was roaring for a BLT, so I started to walk. God, I should have been paying more attention. I should have noticed the signs of civilization fading away, the railroad and farmhouses and industrial complexes of the corrugated steel being gradually replaced by views of old abandoned sheds and the crumbling concrete skeletons of buildings. Until even that was gone, leaving only endless fields of corn on either side of me. I should have listened to that terrible feeling in my chest. Maybe if I had, I could have turned around, walked out of hell, instead of plunging myself deeper and deeper. What I wouldn't do for some shade. I forgot my hat in his truck, and the sun's heat soaked into my head until my skull felt like a pressure cooker, boiling my brains. I could see the heat radiating off the road like somebody was turning up a thermostat. Where were all the cars? Used to be one would pass every minute, providing at least a moment of hope. Now I couldn't even hear the roar of them in the distance, nor could I hear the hummingbirds or the Mormon crickets. My walking slowed and became drowsy, almost a waddle. Hours must have passed, but the sun hadn't moved an inch, looming directly in the center of the sky above. Even my addled mind had realized I couldn't make it anywhere by marching forward, but it was also too late to turn back. I'd never make it. Part of me wanted to flee the road, dash into the corn where it'd be shade and maybe a refuge. But deep down, I knew there was no shade or refuge out there. No farms, no towns. Those fields stretched on forever and ever, and if I entered them, I'd never find my way back to the road. I was ready to collapse. My knees bent and shook with every step I took, ready to give out from under me. I imagined the turkey vultures picking my corpse apart on the side of the road. And then there, far down the road, was a flash of color. I thought it was a mirage at first, but the pickup truck slowly came into focus, like a spot of clarity cutting even through the blur of my vision. I tried to call out, but my throat was too dry, and only a rasping groan emerged. It was all I could do to wave my arms in the air like I was mad. It was going fast, and I feared it might just leave me to die. But just as it passed me, the driver slammed on the brakes with a hideous squeal, leaving tire tracks in the pavement. I was gasping as I limped to the car, throwing open the door and snatching a plastic water bottle from the middle console, swallowing in 2 and 3 gulps without a word. It felt like the water wasn't just rolling down my throat, but coursing through my entire body like a wave, flowing under my skin and making my hair stand on edge as energy and vitality returned to me. I felt like a corpse that had just been brought back to life. "Oh, thank God," I whispered. I think I was going to go mad. I thought I was going to die out there. The man behind the wheel was a polar opposite of my typical driver. He wore a 3-piece suit and had a 5 o'clock shadow and some old-fashioned hat which hid his eyes in the shade. He didn't even bother to look at me, just waited for me to climb in before smoothly proceeding with his drive. "Don't worry," he said in a smooth, easy tone. "Everything is going to be okay." I prattled on as we drove, recounting what happened. It was a pure stream of consciousness gibberish, or I was just excited to be able to talk again, marveling at the sound of my own voice. He sat silent and motionless all the while, hands at 10 and 2, eyes on the road, at least until he suddenly cut in. "It's been too long since we've had a good storm. Today would be the perfect day for rain." I paused, a bit taken aback by his interruption and by the non sequitur, but then smiled politely. "Yeah, I had no idea it was going to get so hot up here in Nevada, and this time of year it's like an oven out there." Where is he taking me? The thought flashed across my mind, unbidden. I looked out over those endless rolling cornfields for any hint of a landmark. Nothing to see at all. My eyes drifted down to the hood, seeing the truck's scraped up red paint and finding it oddly familiar. They flicked onto the middle console, and there it was, that 1.2 ounce labeled Copenhagen smokeless tobacco. That terrible, constricting feeling in my chest was slowly returning. I gazed at the rearview mirror to find that the glass had been busted, but through the twist of mangled glass, I could almost swear the boilerplate disclaimer at the bottom read, "It's getting closer." His voice opened up again from the driver's seat. "It's been too long since we've had a good storm. Today would be a perfect day for rain." A shudder ran up my spine. He'd spoken those words with the same cadence, rhythm, and tone. It was like somebody playing back a recording or some NPC of the universe repeating the same voice lines, trying to execute broken and fragmented code. As if on cue, we both slowly turned to face each other, and I was met by the reflection of my own face twice over. He had no eyes, only round little mirrors lodged in his sockets. Foggy and gray, but just clear enough for me to see myself. Things, I realized, were happening to me that existed in the reflection of those mirrors. They were so small and blurry, and it was hard to even tell what. In most cases, all I could see was the haze of red. I realized that those mirrors seemed to be showing me every way I could possibly die here. Every way the driver could kill me. Every way I could kill myself. Sometimes Other things I don't even recognize appeared in the vehicle to do the job. "Don't worry," his voice played again. "Everything is going to be okay." The car was moving faster and faster now until those endless cornfields were an indecipherable blur on either side of us. He wasn't stepping on the gas, nor was there a roaring of the engine. It felt more like friction itself had been dispelled, and the truck was free to accelerate on and on forever. Still, I almost considered jumping out, but the mirrors in his eyes showed me a reflection of doing so, and then being shredded into chunks of meat by the asphalt, like it was warning me. The man seemed to be falling into a seizure now, twitching and convulsing in his seat. I thought he was grinning at me, but really the muscles in his face were just pulling back, skin stretched painfully taut over his features. I watched the volume knob on the radio turn up of his own accord, but instead of emanating from the speakers, the sound rumbled from the man's throat in a fit of static. "Hitchhiker, found, butchered, along Lincoln Highway." He spoke in desperate voices as if his words were being sliced together across multiple channels. Pieces were found scattered for miles along roadside. What could I do but scream and beg? If only I could run or fight back, there would be some catharsis in it, at least some illusion that I had any power over my own fate. But we were just driving so fast, faster than any man-made object has ever traveled. Once the temperature was soaring, baking my brain and my skull. The sky seemed to be fading into a lifeless gray before beginning to flicker with visceral shades of orange and yellow. The sun remained its vigil directly above us, unforgiving, unrelenting. The stalks of corn were dying and shriveling in the fields, turning ashy and gray. I swear the very metal frame of the truck seemed to be melting, shedding droplets on the road like ice cream left in the sun. There, out there at the very end of the world, an unfathomable distance away and yet closing the gap with such horrific speed, it seemed that there would only be seconds before it was upon us. The towering silhouette of the thing with several heads and 7 crowns. And all were singing in a dread harmony, a blasphemous mockery of the concept of music, yet their voices carried those untold millions of miles of infernal wind which boiled the frame of the truck. The driver was staring at me now. Those mirror eyes were bulging halfway out of its sockets, each now reflecting the view from inside a car, headlights illuminating a drive down a dark forest road late at night. And his mouth was open wide, so wide, with all those countless voices from across every channel had united into a unified ritualistic chant. "It is getting closer. It is getting closer. It is getting closer." I no longer feared the certain death that would result from a crash at these speeds. I only feared what would happen to me if I allowed myself to be delivered to that creature. I started by trying the door, but no earthly force could ever open it or break its window. Then I turned my mad flailing onto the driver, punching and strangling, trying to slam his head against the steering wheel. His grip on the wheel never tottered, even for an instant. He made no effort to stop me, even as I uselessly attempted to pry those glassy eyes out. I was halfway in the driver's seat now, blinded by tears throughout the mad struggle, making a mad scramble into his seat and slammed my foot down on the brake. In a moment, I was far away from the chaos. I passed through the windshield with such speed that I felt nothing of it, and my momentum alone seemed to carry me on for miles. Everything went dark. For a moment, with horror, I thought that this is what death was like. An endless void of black, an infinite sensory deprivation chamber. But when my eyes adjusted and I saw the silhouettes of the trees above and the cool pavement below, and directly above me sat the moon, full and eerie. I tried to stand but found that my body would no longer obey. I think I managed to twitch a finger a little bit, but I can't be sure. I tried to scream for help, but only emitted a low rumble in my chest, audible only to my ears. Speaking of, they were just the last faculty to return to me. Faintly, as if through a fog, I could hear crickets chirping in the forest and low grumble of a car engine idling. And then, was that the sound of my boyfriend? I could hear him crying by the crack of his voice, and he begged something, but I could only make out the words, "Don't look." And then footsteps crunching shattered glass on the pavement as somebody approached. I looked up at him, and just the sight of his face drew another rumble from my chest as I tried to scream and sob and beg for God. It was me. His breath fogged from the wintry Pennsylvania air. I watched the other me's eyes as he passed through every stage of grief in moments. I knew exactly how he felt. After all, I remembered it like it was yesterday. What I must have looked like right then. My back broke in and my skull caved in on one side. I could draw out every little detail from memory. And worse, I could feel what my victim had felt in that moment. His grief at a life he never lived. I felt the weight of all the one days he harbored in the back of his mind without knowing. One day they'll finally give me that promotion. One day I'll settle down with someone I love and have a kid, name them Lily or Elijah. One day I'll save up enough to bring them to Kyoto to see Gion Masuri. And one by one, slowly, inextricably, I felt those days turn into nevers. I knew I looked like a corpse already. Maybe I should be, by all rights, be dead, by natural law. But something kept me alive long enough to hear the frantic conversation me and my boyfriend were having. Every word I was forced to remember was like a dagger to my heart. I'd do anything to take them back, and then I was kept alive, even as they dragged me through the forest. Even at every movement felt like white-hot needles being driven into my fractured spine. I was alive to listen to them digging. I was alive to be tossed into the pit, to feel the dirt piled on top of me bit by bit, to feel the weight of it upon me, to be trapped in the womb of the earth, down in the dark with the worms. I was suffocating down there, and I knew this choking desperation would be my eternal punishment. To inhabit the body of my own victim forever and ever. I made peace with that fact. I deserved every moment of it. And at that very instant, I felt light. It was the feeling of ice-cold water upon my sunburnt face that finally woke me up. I sat up, coughing and sputtering, to hear the murmuring of a crowd all around me. "He's alive!" a bearded old man shouted. A mass of hands rushed to stabilize me, prevent me from fainting again, as I lurched dizzily. I blinked, confused, blinded by the light. I looked down at my hands, as if just to confirm I was myself again. "Good merciful Christ, kid, you were passed out right on the side of the road." I looked drowsily around. A few people had parked their cars on the shoulder, rushing to investigate the body on the side of the road. Surely they expected a murder. Maybe that would bring some excitement to this dreary bit of the country. But instead, they concluded they found some young, stupid city boy who'd just about keeled over from heat exhaustion. "Trying to hitchhike in this heat wave?" one man huffed, shaking his head. "You must have lost your mind." "Don't worry," a much kinder woman said, rubbing my back as she helped me choke down water. "Everything is going to be okay." It took me a few minutes to get my bearings, but eventually I started to believe them. Surely I just passed out from the heat, had a weird dream. My head was still sore and pounding after all. I politely declined an ambulance once I was back on my own feet, although a couple people offered me a ride to the next town, afraid I'd get myself killed otherwise. Relieved and more than a little embarrassed, I was immediately ready to put this all behind me, to forget about this strange journey I'd been sent on by my own subconscious. And then a car passed on the road that had previously been empty just a moment before. A classic hearse. And there behind the wheel, the man with the mirrored eyes. His nice suit unblemished, his features refined. He flashed me a knowing grin, and in that instant I watched him pass. teeth all shiny and white. He even reached up and tipped his hat to me, as if he'd done me a service. Or maybe he was trying to warn me not to forget what I'd just been through, the lesson I learned on that long road through hell. And then when he was past me, all I could do was watch his car be reduced to a black speck in the distance, seemingly swallowed up by the blazing white of the setting sun.